Domestic violence cases on the rise, how the Pima County Sheriff's Department is becoming a national model for handling such cases.
It's costing us billions of dollars every year. We cannot ignore this situation, not just because of the money, because of the real cost, the human toll that is occurring.
A slow and painful journey to recovery. We'll go inside one Southern Arizona crisis shelter.
Tell you the truth, I was very scared. But I said, no, I have to save my children from all of this. From all these arguments and all this life, this is not the life for them. So that's what I made a decision to leave the house.
This is Arizona Week. The numbers are staggering. An estimated 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence in her lifetime. In Pima County, Emerge Center Against Domestic Abuse offers a safe haven to victims. Here's my interview with CEO of Emerge, Ed Mercurio-Sakwa.
The thing about domestic violence, we typically tend to think of the physical component of that, black eyes, broken bones, and of course that's a key piece of it. Unfortunately, there are many folks who unfortunately have that that they suffer from. But really at the core of domestic violence is power and control. It's one person's attempt to have control over another person, and the various tactics that they might choose to play that out looks different for everyone. So for some people it's physical, for others it's threats of something physical. For others it's emotional or verbal abuse, helping to isolate somebody from their support systems, controlling the finances. It's all those different ways that it might play out that are all for that purpose of having control over somebody else.
A domestic violence victim comes to some place like Emerge. What can he or she expect when they arrive at your facility?
Well, all of the people that need our services come through our 24/7 bilingual hotline. And that's really that first step, because it's an entree into any of our programs and services, but it's also a service unto itself. So for some people, it's simply calling that hotline, and they may never use any other service. They just need somebody to talk to, somebody to help them through the process of figuring out, is this even abuse, let alone what can I do about it, what do I want to do about it, what's safe to do about it. And then for people who do need something more, we've got trained staff and volunteers who can talk to them about their particular situation, because the last thing that we want to do is prescribe what they need to do about that. It's got to be their choices, because it's their life and it's their safety that's on the line. So we can talk to them about, is shelter something you need or want? Is it more of a community-based type service that you might need, support groups? Is it legal assistance? What does that look like for them?
How big of a problem is domestic violence?
Well, it's huge. Statistically, we're looking at 1 in 4 women will experience it at some point in their lifetime. And so that means that all of us know somebody who has suffered or is suffering from domestic violence. We don't always know that. It's not always visible to us or something that we're aware of, but we all know somebody. And when you take that down to kind of the more local level, there are 12,000 domestic violence calls to local law enforcement every year just here in Pima County and Tucson. We get about 4,500 to 5,000 unduplicated people that we serve every year at Emerge. And what we know about both of those statistics is that they're the tip of the iceberg, because domestic violence is also known to be one of the most underreported crimes that exists, because of the shame, because of the safety concerns, and because of the abusive partner's efforts to cover it up. And so most research suggests that only about 1 in 10 cases get reported. So you can take those numbers, multiply them by 10, and start to have a sense of the scope of this. And that's just the parts that are criminal in nature. There's many aspects of domestic violence that do not fall under criminal statute, but are just as terrorizing and harmful to the victims. And so it's a humongous problem in our community and around the world.
There may be people watching this who have long wondered, am I a victim? Do I know a victim? What is your message to them, or how do you communicate to them that what you're experiencing, or maybe what you know of to be happening in a friend's household, is not okay?
Well, I think for anybody that's considering that question, I would encourage them to call Emerge's 24/7 hotline, because that's an opportunity to talk through with somebody exactly what's going on in a confidential manner, to really be able to dissect that and see what is happening. And sometimes it's really subtle. That's the thing. If they're being punched in the face, perhaps it's a little clearer, this is not right. But it's so often so much more subtle than that. The tactics that are used, that are manipulative in nature and controlling in nature, and so it may not be so easy. And I think that's something people feel, well, if it was happening, I would know it, and that's not necessarily the case. That's not to say we're ever looking to create something that's not there, but it is to say that it can be really helpful to talk through. And if there's that gut instinct that something's not right or healthy, we want people to check that out. So we'd encourage people to do that, and not just those who are victims, but people who are concerned about someone in their life, a neighbor, a coworker, a friend, or a family member. They can call that hotline as well and check that out and talk through, how can I best support this person? But not just in the emotional support way, but how can I do so in a way that's going to be safe for them? Because that's an unfortunate piece of this too, is that when people finally decide, I'm ready to do something about this situation, I'm ready to get out of a bad, dangerous, abusive relationship, doing so in a safe way can be very difficult. And things that might seem safe are not necessarily so. So we'd want them to check with the professionals on that hotline to make sure they're doing that in a safe way.
The Pima County Sheriff's Department really amping up its efforts to stop this problem, to empower the victims. Have you seen a change in maybe the people who come through your doors?
Yeah, you know, we're very fortunate to have some good, solid relationships with all the municipal law enforcement agencies in town, the Pima County Attorney's Office, the court systems. But I'll say for sure, the Pima County Sheriff's Department has really stepped it up a notch in taking it beyond what they're required to do for sure, but beyond what most people expect them to do, and really proactively, not just enforcing the law on the front end, but once there's been a court order or no contact order, following up and making sure that that's being upheld and not putting it on the victim to have to enforce that, but leaving it to the law enforcement system as it should be. And so they're really going above and beyond. What that's meant, though, of course, is we are seeing a lot of additional cases coming forward because of this great contact by law enforcement, higher lethality cases that are coming forward, which is great in terms of making sure that those people who are in those situations get the help they need. Obviously, it's not great that those situations exist, but given that they do, we want to make sure that they're connected to services as quickly and as easily as possible.
All over the state, shelters are the go-to place for women, children, even men suffering domestic violence. In Cochise County, the Forgach House has helped thousands of women in its 30 years of existence. Arizona Public Media's Sandra Westall went inside the crisis shelter.
The intake process doesn't usually last very long. Our biggest concern during that process is to make sure that they feel comfortable being here. About 450 women came from this area, June 2013 to July 2014. About 320 children. So you're looking at 770 individuals that receive help just from this one location.
The Forgach House offers a safe haven to victims of domestic violence. More important, it gives women the support they need to start over.
They're allowed to stay here for 4 months. Within that 4 months, they will receive resources. Just about anybody that they need to get in contact with, our folks here will make sure that they get in contact with them in order to assist them in moving along independently. The most special portion of the shelter to me is the people, the women who help the victims. They're the kind of people that if something ever happened to you, you would hope that they were around. 70% of our women who work here have a story of their own.
I was with my son's father, and he's my youngest son. And it was all very textbook. It was all pretty in the beginning. It was all great, you know, and things just kind of progressed. And I ended up I ended up losing all of my teeth, and he broke my face. Having lived through it and having gotten out of it, I wanted to give other girls the chance to see that it's not your entire life is not that problem that you're going through at that moment.
We got a ton of donations.
Sheila Jimenez walked into the shelter 3 years ago.
I used to take a lot of it home, a lot of the stories and the problems that the people had.
A co-worker taught her how to cope.
She's 60 and I'm 36, but it didn't matter. I think that that was created after we became more comfortable with each other and told each other our stories.
My husband was very ill. When he got sick, he had cancer. He started abusing the alcohol and his medication. And it got worse and worse and worse, and I said, no, I cannot deal with this. He started becoming abusive with the boys, and I didn't want my boys to be abused like that. So I made the decision to leave him behind and save my children.
Maria Morel came to the Forgach house 25 years ago.
And I was so scared, not knowing where I was going, not knowing what I was doing. I had no education. I had no money. I had no means to do, no family. I didn't even know how to drive or write a check or do anything for myself. The shelters in that time, they offered us 45 days. So in those 45 days, I had to have a job, a place to be, and all my finances situated. That's what I learned, the word empowerment. They gave me the tools to be strong. They gave me the tools to be compassionate. Because I said, if they help me, I'm going to do the same for somebody else.
And she returned to the Forgach house, where she spent the last 2 decades taking care of other women, doing what she can to stop a cycle of abuse.
Maria, through food, I think, has made a huge difference. I think food brings people together like that. And that's what people mostly know her for.
To me, it's just like I'm the mom. To me, it's important to be cooking for them. They feel like they're home. That is my goal, to make sure they feel like they are in their own house. This is the home of the future, I call it, because we still have a lot of women to teach, to be themselves, and to become what they need to become, strong. I'm still here, seeing that other women can see that they can do the work that I've done.
The Pima County Sheriff's Department recently changed the way it handles domestic violence cases, and its efforts quickly becoming a national model. Last year alone, investigators responded to nearly 5,000 cases of domestic violence. Here's Sergeant Terry Parish, who leads the Domestic Violence Task Force.
We handled it like the rest of the country did. And basically in the 70s and 80s, cops would show up at a domestic violence incident. They'd dust people off, tell them, hey, you got to quit fighting or we're going to have to send somebody to jail. And we'd go on our way. And more recently, there's been some legislative changes in the 90s, the early 2000s. To 2008 was the last really major update, where the system has begun to recognize the long-term impacts of domestic violence and has started to mandate certain things to happen. More recently, the Pima County Sheriff's Department has gone way past the mandate of the law to try and interrupt the cycle of domestic violence and stop that from occurring in our community.
How does your agency respond now? What's different?
For a long time, domestic violence wasn't taken very seriously. And as a result, you might have a condition of release on a domestic violence case that says, don't commit any more acts of domestic violence. That to me is almost an insult. It's like now it's really against the law because now we're telling you not to do it. It didn't make any sense. So now we're working with pretrial services and we're much more successful than we used to be. We've got some ways to go. But getting conditions that say, don't go to where the victim lives. and don't have contact with the victim. So that is protecting the victim of domestic violence, giving them some time. We've already provided them the resources. Now we're going to provide them the time to stay away from this offender, keep the offender away from them, so that they can move forward with their lives, get orders of protection to increase their protection, and to continue to work with the prosecution. Now to back up just a tad, we then, when they get released from jail and they have these conditions that say no contact with the victim and don't go to where the victim lives, we then go check and make sure. And if they go back, they're going back to jail. We're the only ones I know of anywhere in this country that does this.
Was there an incident that maybe propelled this idea that said we've got to communicate with each other? We're going to get caught?
Not an incident, no. It was really an aha moment. I was the new domestic violence sergeant. I had been a domestic violence detective back in the 90s. I went to some training at NAU, some of it was taught by a researcher here at the U of A, Connie Beck. And she went through some of our cases. And I was always very proud, and I am to this day very proud of all the work that our agency, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, does. But it went through some of our cases and showed how the systems being so independent caused victims so many different problems that we had no idea even existed. It was kind of an aha moment for me. And then I started looking for ways to solve the problem. And I said, why are we always asking, why doesn't she leave? I thought, why don't we make him leave or the offender leave? We can shelter her in place many times. And if we can do that, we can take a little bit of load off of our nonprofit partners who do provide shelter for us. We can try and minimize the load that we send to them, just send them the really dangerous cases. So for me, it was just an aha moment in class where I went, why are we doing it this way? And then the chief heard about it, and Chief Deputy Nanos actually heard about it, and my lieutenant, they heard about it and got behind us, and we've been running ever since and showing everybody else how to do it.
You've become a model for some agencies throughout the country. You are now having other law enforcement agencies call you and say, hey, how do you do this?
We've had calls from as far away as New York, and we've actively working with other agencies, not only in this community, but in Maricopa County, to spread the word and spread the ideas on how we can, comprehensively address domestic violence. Because showing up, responding, and just arresting the offender doesn't do us any good. Studies have shown that 8 out of 10 victims of domestic violence recant. That means they change their story. Why do they do that? Well, let's think about it. Typically it's a female, so we'll talk about a female for a second. 85% of victims are female, okay? So let's talk about it. She's got kids to worry about frequently, okay? Frequently the person exhibiting all the power and control in a household also has all the money and then the control as a result of that as well. So she's got no money, she's got to move her kids if she's going to leave this guy. She's got to worry about the prosecution, deal with that. She's got to find a place to live, get the kids back in school somewhere else, and deal with all of that and the obvious stress this is going to cause all her children. Just now, how's she going to feed them? And on top of that, and this is the part we all forget, that in spite of this control, I mean, she's suffering from symptoms of post-traumatic stress syndrome and Stockholm syndrome, but in spite of that, she married this person or got with this person at some point because hopefully she loved this person. And so you've got a broken heart dealing with all of that. And we somehow expect people to be able to function and do it well while they've been abused all this time. And the system can't work that way anymore.
And this process takes the offender out of the home and keeps him or her out so that you're not uprooting that woman's life and the children's life.
Yeah, for a long time, the system, and I think people in general, I don't think anybody watching today can honestly sit down and say they haven't said or heard somebody say, I don't know why she doesn't just leave this guy. We've all said it, we've all heard it, or most of us anyway. We changed the question is, why are we letting this guy stay here where he can abuse this person and these children? When did it become okay for the system to say, we're going to bring him back home? I mean, I as a father, I've got children. And I cannot imagine something bad, my kid being a victim of crime, and then by the time my kid gets out of the hospital and gets home, the phone's ringing and it's the jail saying, hey, can you come pick up the bad guy that just beat you up? I can't imagine that. But that's what the system across the country has done for years here. And that's the one thing that we're committed to in Pima County. And it's not just the Sheriff's Department anymore, but in Pima County, we're committed to changing that.
The Buzz now with my colleagues here at Arizona Public Media, Christopher Conover with Legislative News, and Sandra Westall, who visited that shelter down in Sierra Vista. Sandra, we'll start with you and an extraordinary place with some really tough women who are managing a lot right now.
Yeah, definitely. And the facility down there in Sierra Vista, the Forgach house, has 46 beds. And when I was there, they only had about 11 women and 13 kids, which may not sound a lot, but it is a handful. That's what they told me there, the women that worked there. And you know, as the story kind of goes, the women there are very compassionate about what they do and about helping the women being able to move forward in their lives. And even some of the women that actually stay at the shelter, at the end of the day, they were talking to me and they said that the women there, they're extremely very, very helpful in so many ways for them on an emotional level, and they really mean a lot to them.
It's a unique circumstance because they service women who come maybe from south of the border in Mexico, but then women who come from all over the country. You said that you actually met a woman from out of state.
Right, I did. Yeah, so mostly the majority of the people that come there, they're from southern Arizona, but they also have people that will come from all over, like Washington, D.C., even Colorado, Maine, and whatnot, really from all over.
And one of the things that you noted in the story is that there's a time limit, or a term, I should say, where these women and children, in some cases men, can stay at that shelter before they kind of have to move on, or the hope is they've learned enough that they can go out on their own again?
Yeah, so during a fiscal year, they will have about 120 days on them, so 4 months, to use the services to the best of their capability, but they will obviously get a lot of help as well when they're there from case managers and also from the program mates that are there. But they only have 120 days, but if they fall out and come back, they can use the 120 days during a year. So that's kind of the goal, to make them be independent by that time.
We were able to connect with them through the Catholic Services here in southern Arizona, who expressed that they get some funding from maybe the Diocese of Tucson, maybe from grants and other organizations. These people also getting donations, though, from anybody who walks into the shelter.
Yeah, that was something that was very surprising to me, that even when I was there was a man that came in, and he brought a bunch of stuff because he was cleaning out his garage, and he said that he used to grow up at a shelter and he wanted to give back. And as he was making his donations, the women working there, they said this happens all the time. In the community in Sierra Vista, the shelter is very established and embedded in the community. It's been there since the 1980s. And they also get a lot of support from the community, but they do get an overwhelmingly support from just private people. And they even got a van donated to them. And they're also getting so much surplus that they give back to homeless shelters, even food and other supplies as well.
Wonderful. And Christopher, I want to bring you into this because some people often wonder if there's budget cuts, albeit through the state or maybe even federal funding. How does this really trickle down to groups like this Forgach House?
How this trickles down in this year's budget, it's a little hard to tell. It's not obvious. There are no direct cuts to domestic violence programs in the budget. However, a lot of the services that are used by the residents of domestic violence shelters, or any shelter for that matter, those did receive cuts. So it may not be a direct cut exactly to, we're giving less money to the shelter that you visited or something like that. We also saw big cuts to the counties. So if the counties are passing along money to the shelters, those are decisions that will come a little later on. Will the county be able to give so much money as it did last year as it figures out its budget and deals with the cuts that have come down from Phoenix?
Okay, and moving away from some funding issues, let's talk about Common Core and the governor taking a stance this week, and then it sort of fizzled out there in the legislature.
There is a bill in the legislature that is still technically alive that replaces Common Core, and it has moved pretty quickly and pretty smoothly, as smoothly as something like that can move, through the legislative process. Early in the week, Governor Ducey was talking to the State Board of Education, and beforehand he spoke with reporters, and he said there he doesn't want to get rid of Common Core. He'd like to change some of the standards, but let's not gut the entire program and start again. Let's change it over time. And that's what he told the Board of Education to do. Look at it, make changes as they deem necessary. That bill all but stalled at that point, the bill that would have gotten rid of the Common Core standards. It was up on a calendar, ready for a vote in the Senate, and it's just been sitting there. It has not been taken up yet, and he made it pretty clear he doesn't want to see that bill on his desk.
Okay, maybe again next year around this time. Other big news this week having to do with voting. Explain that.
We've had a change to, or a bill that could change voting law, specifically dealing with early ballots and who can bring early ballots in. A lot of people help out elderly parents or people they're caregivers for, take their early ballots for them. That's still fine. You can only take 2 early ballots per election cycle. What the bill is aiming at is what's called ballot harvesting, where people go and collect hundreds of ballots and take them in. The argument is that's ripe for potential fraud, though backers could not cite any specific example of fraud. I spoke with the Pima County recorder, F.Ann Rodriguez, and she was against it. She said it's really a solution in search of a problem. This bill it died in a committee, was brought back up as an amendment in the Appropriations Committee, and ran through there and is waiting a final vote now.
Okay, a lot of people saying maybe this session is fairly short or maybe average. We could be wrapping up in a couple of weeks now.
The goal is April 2nd. That is next week. We'll see if they get there. It's a laudable goal, but we'll see if they get there. I've heard rumors of maybe it'll stretch another week or so, but they are definitely winding down.
Okay, lots to look for in the next week, in the next few days. All right. Sandra Westall, thank you for your reporting down at the Forgach House in Sierra Vista, and Christopher Conover with our legislative news. And that's our program for all of us here at Arizona Public Media. Thanks for joining us. I'm Lorraine.